Fact-checking Apple TV's Masters of the Air, what Austin Butler show gets right. Author David McCullough had some advice for historian Donald Miller when word arrived that Miller's epic tome on the 100th Bomber Group, Masters of the Air, would become a $250 million, 9-episode Apple TV Plus series. He said, "Don, you gotta watch out, make sure they don't Hollywood-ize it," Miller says with a laugh. But he'd worked with producers Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg before, on HBO's 2010 adaptation of his book The Pacific, so I had great confidence. Miller's book tells the story of the young men in the bomber group that helped turn the tide in World War II with its high-risk missions over Germany. The series, also based on Air Force records and interviews with 100th veterans, largely sticks to facts about the lives of its American protagonists, with an occasional composite character thrown in to keep the story moving. Miller says all the major players in the series were real World War II veterans, notably the lead roles that included Madge, Gail Cleven, Madge, John Egan, LT, Curtis Biddick, LT, Harry Crosby, Madge, Robert Rosenthal and LT, Roy Clater. The big difference between making this and the Pacific is that back then, a lot of those vets were still alive and the actors could call them, or we'd have them on set, and they'd tell us what really happened, says Miller. With this, I was practically the only one who had known or interviewed many of these real vets. So the actors would come to me, and I'd help best I could. Miller says many veterans he has interviewed had great relationships with RAF pilots, who they'd meet up with on leave in London. But tensions that often surfaced among members of the Allied forces were real. It was mostly over the fact that the Brits thought American flyboys were pampered, he says. The Americans were much better paid, they wore snappy uniforms, seemed a little more dashing, and in the competition for women they seemed to have the advantage. Money in the pockets, Sinatra records, the latest popular culture, foreign accents, these dashing Americans, the exoticism of it. I don't think you'll find combat anywhere in history as intense as these air fights, says Miller. You're in an aluminum tube so thin a guy with a screwdriver could punch a hole in it. German would aim for the pilot and co-pilot, and a lot of pilots were beheaded by gunfire. Even if your plane did not succumb to flak or enemy fire, living through a bombing raid once, let alone dozens of times, frazzled nerves, he says. The noise is horrific, there are no seats, there are things flying all over the place. And it stunk already of cigarette smoke and cordite and the smell of human blood. And you couldn't take evasive action, there are no foxholes in the sky.